Hello and welcome to this tutorial for VPT8. When you downloaded VPT8 and unzipped the folder, you would get something like this on a Mac and like this on Windows. The VPT8 folder contains the application, the README file, which is useful to read through, a link to the VPT8 forum and the VPT8 documentation. Let's just have a quick look at that. The VPT8 forum is quite useful for asking questions after you have read the online manual, which you'll find when you click on the VPT8 documentation link, and it contains a lot of information about the different sections. But let's focus on this folder for the moment. It also contains two folders. One is kind of the default project folder or the example folder for VPT8, and also an empty project folder, which is maybe useful if you want to add your own content. So if we have a look at the default project folder, it contains some files. It contains a text file for the cuelist. It contains a document just telling VPT how many layers it should create when it starts up. So in this case 2. It has a preference file which you can modify before you open VPT. It has the project path file, which is the kind of the important file to remember when you open the project folder or open the project from VPT. Then you have a video folder which contains all the media content in terms of videos and still images. You have the mask folder which contains black and white images which functions as mask in VPT. And then you have just a folder with the different presets for the sources and the layers and the router and some other things. So same thing in the empty project, except the empty project only contains the VPT8 logo as a video source. So let's go ahead and open VPT8. So this assumes that you have already opened VPT8 once. At least on Mac you might get an issue when you try to open it. Then you have to right click or control click on the app and select open to open it. And then you will get the interface, which is this window here, the preview window and the VPT output window. The VPT output window is the window that you would then drag to your projector and then go into full screen mode, either using the full screen button or the escape key on your keyboard. Right now there's nothing going on inside VPT because we haven't loaded the project. One indicator of that is that this button is off, which is basically the on-off button for the engine of the VPT. There's also no content anywhere in the layers or in the sources. So we will start by loading a project by going to File, Open, and we will start with the empty project just to start from scratch. So now I'm already in the empty projects folder and I want to select the project path inside that folder. Click Open, and then the project is loaded. And you can see, even though there's not much going on, you can see the on button is on and there's also something going on over here. So let's just do the really first steps on how to get started. So we start by creating a layer, and then we do that by clicking on the plus button up here. You will see a yellow circle appear in this section indicating a new layer has been created. You'll see the corner handles both in the preview and the VPT output window, and you also see a layer information has been created down here. For the moment, the layer doesn't contain anything, it's just empty. So we need to find a source we want to use and tell the first layer that it wants to use that as a source. So now it's not really so much to choose from. We have these sections here which are basically different source containers for videos, and you can see what's inside them by clicking on the triangle. Right now they're all set to the same folder and has the same content. So let's just select the first video source. I turn it on and I select the one file which is there, which is the VPT8 logo. Still, you don't really see anything because you haven't added it to a layer yet. If you would like to monitor the source without putting it in a layer, you could use the screen next to each source. And then you can see what's in there. It's not really recommended during when you're actually running a show, at least, because it might make everything go a bit slower. So I just click again and then I turn it off. Okay, so I have selected a source in video container 1, and then I want to select this container for my layer. So if I click on this none, I get up a list of the available source containers. So I am using one video, and there you go. There you can see VPT8 appears in both the preview and the VPT output window. So now I could start to drag and position my my layer. I can do that either in the preview window or in the VPT output window. Sometimes it's easier to do it in the preview window, sometimes it's easier to do it in the output window, depending on what you are projecting onto, but both are possible. So basically I just click and drag on the corners. So I can do it either up here, like this. Okay, so now we have found something we want to store, so now we'll create our first preset. And the preset section is right here. So first we need to select, give it a number, that's kind of the important part. And then a name is optional, but it's usually useful to know in terms of what you have actually stored. So let's just call it the VPT8 logo or VPT logo. And then I need to click store to actually store it. And then you will see it appears in this list. So if I now move this or do some changes to this layer and then click on the preset 1, it will go back to what we stored. So that's kind of an important thing in VPT. You don't go to a file save, which is not even possible to save what you do. You save the different scenes as presets. That's an important thing. An important concept in VPT is the active layer, which is the layer which you are working on and which is selected. Currently we have only one layer, so it's not so easy to see it down here, but basically when the active layer is selected, you get a lighter blue here, and it's also the yellow circle indicates that this is the active layer. You can also see it when you are in the active tab, which layer is selected. So now we have only one layer, and it's the number 1, which is visible here. In the active tab, you can do a lot of different adjustments to the layer and also to the texture, which is kind of the content of the layer. So let's first look at kind of the things you can do with the layer itself, and then you have some default scaling. So we could either say that we want the layer to fill the whole output, or for instance only cover the bottom part, or just the center. And we have these four numbers here. They correspond to the corner handles, so this would be the top left corner, top right corner, etc. And these number boxes here are the numbers related to the position of the corner handles. So you can either click and drag in these number boxes to change the position. You can see now that the top left corner is moving. One thing to know about number boxes in VPT is that the closer to the right in the number box you click and drag, the more precise you get. So if I click here, I get more precision than if I click close to the decimal point, where it's much harder to have control. Another way to kind of fine-tune corner positions is to use the arrow keys. So if you use the arrow key, it moves the corner which has been selected here. So if I now go to the bottom right corner and use the arrow keys, you see the numbers changing, but it's a bit hard to see the position change maybe. But if I shift while I hold in the arrow keys, it moves a little bit faster. This could be very useful when you really want to fine-tune things. Another thing related to the layer itself is the transparency of the layer. You can also see that you can change that directly in the layer. And you can colorize or tint the layer. And then we can look at how to create a mask for the layer, which is also a very useful feature when you are projecting on different types of forms. So this is the main mask section. So to create a mask, you can click on the mask button. Then you see your layer seems to have disappeared, but if you now click on the editor button, this window here will show up. It defaults to a triangle mask, just to have 3 starting points in the mask. And you can see also on the output you now get this half-dimmed image where the mask is not applied, just to give you an idea what part of the image is actually inside and outside the mask. So it's relatively simple to create a mask. You either move the existing points, so you can now see I'm moving this one, and then I just click to add more points. Like this. It doesn't really matter since we're not projecting onto something precise at the moment, but just to create a shape. So I just add points. And when I've added enough points, I can add a lot more points if I want. But for now, we'll just do this, and then I'll just give it a name here. Let's just call it mask 1. And then I click on Save Mask. It is then converted into a black and white PNG image, which is then applied as a mask. And you can see it has appeared in the list of masks, which is currently the only mask available here. So now I could save maybe this as another preset here. So I could call it logo mask. So now we have one version without mask and one with a mask. It's also possible to blur the mask by clicking on the mask blur, and then applying blur, then the edge of the mask gets blurred. Instead of using a custom mask, you could also use edge blend, which basically lets you blend the edges. So you can see here. There is a few of the elements in the active layer which applies not to the layer itself but to the content of the layer, so the source inside the layer. So you have, for instance, this part here, which is the brightness, contrast, saturation section. So if I click on it, then I can adjust brightness, contrast, and saturation. Not super interesting on this image maybe, but at least you can see that it works. I can also invert the image by clicking on the invert button. To get back to the normal default settings, you click just on this button. Maybe more interesting is down here, where you have a possibility to change the scaling or the position and the direction of the texture in the layer. So if I click on the flip button, I can flip the layer around across the vertical and horizontal axis, or both at the same time. The tile function basically divides the image into a certain number of sections, and then you select which section you want to use in the X and the Y direction, in the horizontal and the vertical direction. So this first menu here gives you the option to you can basically divide the image into 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 sections. If you use then you can decide which of the sections you want to use. So let's say we want to just divide the image into 2, and I want to use the first half of the image. Let's see what happens then. So now I selected one half. Let's select the other half. If I had selected to divide the image into 5 and chose the first of the 5 slices, I would get something like this. If I chose the last slice, the whole texture scales to only show that small part of the image. Let's just go back to showing one half. Same thing for the vertical direction. We can do the same thing. That we want to show, let's say, a very small part of it. So this could be useful if you have divided your image into sections before you use them as a source. Okay, similarly you could also just zoom more manually into the texture, so in the horizontal and the vertical direction, X and Y. Then use these anchor points to kind of move the texture inside the layer after you've zoomed it. And you can also rotate it. This could be also quite useful if you really want to place a content in relation to what you're projecting onto. Finally, we have a blur function and also a motion blur, which doesn't really make sense on a still image, but you can check it out later. Finally, in the active tab, you also have the mesh editor, or the mesh function, which basically allows you to distort the layer even more. So let's just try that out. So first you need to choose how many divisions you want in your mesh. So we can also decide to actually show the mesh on the image itself. Doesn't really matter. And then you just basically click and drag on these points to let's see, to distort the image. Okay, so I went back a step and deleted a preset to just start with the one preset we have with the logo here. And now we're going to look at how to add another layer, which is relatively basic. You just click on the add layer button, the plus button, and the layer is then added on top of the existing layers. So, and as long as we haven't given it a content, it will just be a black layer. And you can see now that you have two numbers here and you have two layers here, and the active layer is the light blue here and the yellow circle here, and you can also see it here. So first I should assign a source to this layer. So I'm going to use one of the solid source, which you need to turn on if it's not on. It's basically just a monochrome white layer or source. So we select, this is then one solid, so I select one solid from the menu, and you can see it's just a white color filling the whole layer. It's still covering the whole of the first layer though, so we can have a look at this transparency slider here, which basically decides how transparent the layer should be. You could also do the same thing here with both the layers. But let's instead resize it to a small size here. Then we shift click and drag, then we can move the layer around. There's also a shortcut if you option shift click and drag the mouse up and down, you can change the vertical size, and if you drag it sideways, you can change the size. Okay, so let's just adjust the corner a little bit, and let's add a color. And you do that in this section here. Let's add red, for instance. And one thing to remember when you create a new layer after you've created presets is that presets which have already been stored, they don't know anything about the new layer, so you have to resave presets after you've made new layers. But now we only have one preset, so we can just store this one again. Okay, let's make a few more presets based on these two layers now. So now both layers are visible. Let's make one where just the video is visible. So I just drag the transparency slider down, and I select a new number for the presets, click store. If I had the same number, I would just overwrite the previous preset. Okay, so now only the logo is visible. Let's reverse that so only the solid, this red layer, is visible. So we could also change the name of it here, store. So now we have 3 presets. Let's make a last one which is just no layers visible, and click store, or change the number, give it a name, click store. So now I can click on these different presets to select them. So we have the one preset with both layers visible, just the VPT logo, just the red surface, and blackout. So let's make something with these 4 presets. Let's make a little cue lists that can trigger these different clips and make a transition between the different presets. So let's just go back to preset 1, and then here you have different tabs you can select. So, but now we're going to look at the cue list. You need to understand kind of the logic and the syntax of the cue list, and the best way to start with that is either to click on this question mark button where you get an explanation of the different shortcuts, or read the online manual. But the basic ones we're going to use now is the fade, which is basically fading from one preset to another in a specified amount of time. So you fade the preset number to another preset number, and then the fade time in seconds. And we're also going to use the delay, which is how many seconds things will be delayed before it moves on to the next line in the cue list. We will also have a look at the loop, which basically tells the cue list to jump to another line in the cue list. So let's see how we can work with this. The easiest way to work with the cue list is to click Open Editor and then just add commands above the end. The end needs to be there at the end of the cue list, basically. So let's say we want to do a fade from preset 1 to preset 2 in 3 seconds. Then we want to do a fade from preset 2 to preset 3 in 2 seconds. A fade from preset, let's do a cut directly to preset 4, which is the blackout preset. Let's start with this. I close the text editor, and then there's still nothing happening here, so I need to update the cue list here. And now you see the commands here. If I now switch to play mode, there's a few things happening. The corner handles disappear, and we are now ready to click on a cue to see what happens. So the first cue should fade from the first preset to the second one. So let's see what happens in 3 seconds. Yep. I could then click on use the return key to jump to the next preset. I can also click directly on the cue list. But if we wanted these to move automatically, also when you finished one cue, you should go automatically to the next. We need to add something. So I switch back to edit mode, open the editor, and to tell VPT that after this line I want to continue to the next one, you add, with a space between, you add a plus. So now it would do fade from preset 1 to preset 2 in 3 seconds, and then go to the next line. And we will do the same thing there. And maybe then we should add a delay, which means that after it has executed the second line, it should wait for maybe 3 seconds before it goes to the next line. Let's see how this works. And we need to update the cue list again. We go to play, and then we click on the first line. So it will jump to the first one and then fade from 1 to 2, then it fades from 2 to 3, then it waits 3 seconds, then it cuts to the black, and then it stops. So let's just add a loop so it goes back to the beginning, so it kind of continues as long as we want. So we open the editor. After this line here, we also need to add a plus so it jumps to the next line. We use the L for loop, and then we want to loop to the first line in the cue list. So this number here does not refer to a preset number, but to the actual line in the cue list. We close the cue list editor and we update the cue lists, and let's see how this works. I click. Actually, I need to add another. We need to add another line to avoid a jump here, because now it cuts to number 4 and then it jumps back to preset 1, so we should actually add another line here. So let's add fade from 4 to preset 1 in 3 seconds, for instance, and then we need to add another plus. Okay, let's see what this will look like. We close the editor, update the cue list, switch to play mode, click on the first one. It fades from 1 to 2 in 3 seconds, from 2 to 3 in 2 seconds, delay 3 seconds, cuts directly to blackout, and fades straight up to the first one, and then it goes back to the beginning. And this will go on and on until you actually stop the cue list. You can stop the cue list either by clicking the stop button or the edit button. Let's click the stop button. So now we've made a cue list. Okay, let's look at the sources a bit more, because now we have only used a still image from one of the video containers and a solid source. So if we want to add our own sources, how do we do that? Well, you could do it in several ways. Let's look at one of them. Let's go to the empty project file, which we are actually currently working in now. Inside the video folder there is only one file, and that's the logo. So we could add more media to this folder by dragging it directly to this folder. So for instance, I would like to try one of the videos which are in the default project, which also comes with VPT, which is the Maya move. So I'll just select it and copy it, and then move back to our empty project. Go to the video folder and then paste it in there. So this is a video like this one here. It has also sound, as you hear. So now I've added that to the video folder, and you might expect it to automatically appear here, but it doesn't. To update the folder, if you add files to the folder after you've opened VPT, you need to manually update it by clicking on the number here. So it says click to refresh folder contents. And then you will see that the Maya movie has been added. So let's select that as our source instead of the logo. And you can now see it's playing back here, but you can't hear the sound because the volume, which is over here, has been turned down. So I can turn up the volume. I'll take it a bit down. There are a few or many things you could look at in this section here, but for now I'll just show you a few things. The default mode for a video container is that the source, I'll just turn this down, is looped. You can turn the loop off, which means it will just play once. You can also do the palindrome. We need to select it again to get this to work. So now it plays forwards and backwards as a loop, but let's just leave it as a loop. The rate can be changed here, for instance, so now it goes much slower. A different way of adding content would be to drag folders of videos or still images to the different containers here. You cannot drag single video files. That does not work, basically. So let's see if we can find another folder of videos somewhere. So I have a few folders on my laptop here. We drag this folder of videos onto one of the video containers. You can see the green plus sign coming up there. We just drag it to where the menu is. And you can see it now says constructions here, which was the name of the folder. And if I click on the triangle here, see there's a lot of different video files that showed up. So let's turn this one on and use it for this second layer here, which now has a red solid. So instead of using the solid as a source, we simply just switch to the second video, and then we have to select a video here. doesn't really matter, but let's just do this one here. And as you see, it's still tinted red because it's using all the same layer settings as was for the previous source in that layer. So another source you could use is a live input. So let's turn on the camera on the laptop, and I've pointed it outside my window here to see if we get something there. Yep. So I can select that as my source instead of the one video. I can select one cam, and you can see here's the view outside my window in my studio. I can also choose to record the live camera into one of the media containers. So let's do that. I will select which folder it will be recorded into, and I'll just use the first one. I click on the record button. Click again to stop it. And then if I have a look up here in the first video source container, you will see there's a file called xlive101. It's automatically named and numbered. So let's see if I select that one instead. And then I need to go back to the video source. So now I'm using a recorded video from the live camera directly into VPT, which is kind of a nice way of easily getting new material into the app. So now I'm just going to turn off the camera since I'm not actually using it anymore, since I'm using the recorded video. And now I could, for instance, speed this up so it goes really fast. Yeah, just leave it like that. I could mix different sources as well. So I have one container here which is called mix. Basically it mixes two of the other sources together and then uses blend mode similar to what you find in Photoshop before it's sent to a layer. So let's try to mix these two here, source 1 and 2. So first I turn it on. They are kind of selected by default, these sources, but you select the sources here. And the blend mode you select here. Mix is kind of the standard crossfading blend modes. Let's just try the overlay, for instance. And then I need to say that I want to choose, so this would be the 8 video, so I could replace the 1 video with the 8 video, and then you would see the pipe coming through here. And if I adjust the slider here, you will see it will change. So this could be a nice place to show a very important part of VPT, which is the idea of mapping different controller values to different parameters in VPT. So let's say we want to just control this mix fade here using a different type of controller instead of doing this on the slider here. So I could, for instance, use some of the built-in controllers called LFOs, which means low frequency oscillators. Basically waveforms which can then control the values of different parameters. So let's have a little look at that. So I click on the LFO tab here. These 6 are kind of the main generators, and the last 4 lets you mix 2 of these generators to make more complex waveforms. But we will focus on kind of the basic form. So to activate one of these wave generators, I just click on the number, and you will see these kind of waves appearing here, and it's now drawing a sine wave form, and you can then choose between sine wave, ramp, triangle, and square. I can control the frequency, which makes the becomes longer between the peaks if I slow it down. And basically the bottoms and the peaks correspond to 0 and 1. Everything is mapped basically to 0 and 1 in VPT. So when something at 0, for instance the opacity, it's basically completely transparent, and if it's at 1 it is completely opaque. And if we want to map this value here to the mixer for the blend levels between the video sources, then 0 would be that it's completely mixed, only showing the first video, and when it's at the top it's only showing the second video. And then everything in between would be then fading between these two. So let's see if we are able to map this controller output to the mixing slider here. And kind of the brain for all these control parameters in VPT is the router. So I click on the router, and these are the control numbers which we can then map to different functions in VPT. So if I quickly go back to the LFO, you can see that this has the number 1, and that corresponds basically to number 1 here. I select a destination, and since this is a video source, I go to the video, and this is actually then the video source number 8, so I select 8, and then I want to choose the type of parameter, and that's the mix level. So let's see if this works. And now we can see the video is actually then fading between the two sources according to the frequency of this one. So if I make this faster, you can see it's fading faster. If I take it down, it can go slower. So now this is just running by itself, which is quite nice. So let's add another oscillator to control the rate of these of the pipe video here. So again, I activate one of the controllers, and let's try another waveform. Let's try the ramp, which is basically goes up, then straight down, up, then straight down. So with this setting, the rate should change relatively quick. So let's go to the router. We are now working with controller number 2. We want to work with video number 2, so we select 2 here, and we want to use the rate. See, or maybe we should try to use the scrub, so it's just scrubbing through the frames. Let's just store this as a preset so we have it. Diff, just give it a number, store. And then let's go and try something else with this router, because maybe more normal, in more normal situations you would use an external controller like a MIDI controller or open sound control sending messages to VPT. But let's have a look at the MIDI section here. Since this is a video tutorial, just showing the interface, it's a bit hard to show a controller, so I'll just use the built-in sliders in the MIDI section here to give a demonstration of how it would work. So actually, let's just turn off these two controllers here now. Go to the MIDI section and see that I can, without having done anything, I can now manually control the mix level, because this is also controller number 1. And this would scrub through the frames of the video which was mapped in the second line here. We could try to make the third slider control just the transparency of both these two layers. So that would be controller number 3. Let's go back to the router section. This is controller number 3. We want to control the layer fade, the number we want to use. So let's see what happens now. Now we are controlling the fade level, or the transparency of layer 1. But if we want the same controller to control the transparency of the other layer, we need to do a little change here. These numbers can be changed as we want. They're just by default numbered 1 through 100 or whatever. So I want actually the controller number 3 to control several things. So I say, okay, I want controller 3 to control the transparency of layer 2 as well, the fade level. So let's see if that works. So I go to the MIDI tab, and now you can see I'm actually controlling both layers. I could also map it so that these layers are faded in opposite directions, so when one is up the other one is down. So I go back to the router and I look at the range here. This is where you specify the range of the controller. So the default is when the controller is at 0, the output is at 0, and when the controller is at 1, the output is at 1. But we could change this. So let's reverse this one. So when the controller is at 1 or at 0, the output is at 1, and when the controller is at 1, the output is at 0. Let's see what happens when we go back to the slider here. So now they are fading in and out, cross-fading basically. Okay, another way you could use a MIDI controller would be to trigger a certain preset or cue, or to select the next preset or cue. So let's see if we can get that to work. So then we have these buttons down here, so let's just use those as a default, and they are numbered from 17 and upwards. So let's just go down here, and the presets and cues are found in the VPT section. You don't have to worry about the destination number for this section here. So here you can select between presets, preset next, preset prev, cue, etc. So let's try the preset next, for instance. So that means when the controller button 17 is clicked, we want to change to the next preset. So let's see if this works. Let's just make sure we are in, let's go to preset 1 then. That will get rid of some other things here. Okay. So if I go now to the MIDI tab and I click on this button, then I hope that it will move to preset number 2. Let's see if that happens. Okay, and let's see if we map the next button to the previous preset prev to see if that works. So now it moves backwards. We could also do this to map controller directly to a preset number. So then you need to set up the router slightly different. So let's do that with number 19 then. So we want to go to a preset directly. So then you need to specify both these numbers should correspond to the preset you want to jump to. So let's say we want to go to preset number 2. Like this. Go back to the MIDI controller, click on button 19, and then you see it switches to preset number 2, even though it doesn't list it here. It's actually the content of preset number 2. You can also see the number down here. So let's try the next button with preset number 4. Then it should go to black out. Let's see. Select VPT, preset, and then I select 4. Okay, go back to MIDI, click on button number 20, and it goes to blackout, and you can also see the number here. Another way of triggering presets and cues is the new clock trigger, which you find here in this tab here. So this is the current time, and here I can select the times that I want to be the trigger points for different presets. So let's just try that to select preset 1, for instance. So we can select preset or cue, or let's try that. So I select 11:40, which is pretty soon, and to actually activate it I need to click here to see it turns yellow, and when this goes to 11:40 it should jump to preset number 1. And it works. So this could be quite useful if you need to have certain things happening at certain times of day, for instance at startup and at shutdown, or just different points of the day. And you can store the clock triggers in this preset list here by shift clicking on the different squares here. So now the active preset is the green one here. Okay, so I've added another video in my video folder in the project folder. So I need to update my video container here. And I want to select this video here. And I want to go through a few things in this clip tab, which you find also on the side here. This lets you do more video related things in terms of looping and scrubbing, etc. So what you first need to do is to select which source you want to work with. We want to work with the first one. So here I can directly change the speed backwards, forwards, etc. So 1 is the standard. Okay, so I changed the loop points here. I can also decide to scrub manually through the video, like here. In the clip time report, you can can see, you can use the position in the video as a controller for something else. So let's try to map the position in the video of this video to something else, like the fade level of this layer. That's what we do down here. We want to use the clip time of video 1, and we want to use controller number. Let's map that to something else than 1. Let's use number 4, for instance. Then we go to the router, and we can say that this should be number 4 layer, and that should be layer number 2, which is the one with the solid. So now you can see that the layer becomes gradually more opaque as we get further into the video. And also the loop report, so when you are at the end of the clip, can be used to trigger other things also outside VPT, which is an interesting way of syncing events. One of the most important control possibilities in VPT is using Open Sound Control, or OSC. This allows you to control VPT remotely, either from another application on the same computer or on a different computer. And you can, in principle, control almost everything in VPT. I encourage you to have a look at the documentation there, because it's a bit hard to cover in a tutorial. But the online manual has the list of all the different commands you can send using Open Sound Control. Similarly, there's a lot of possibilities using serial communication, so you could communicate with Arduino, either getting sensor information from the Arduino or other serial devices, or sending out serial information from VPT. Again, I would recommend you to have a look in the manual. And one final type of source I would like to introduce is the Syphon or Spout sources. I'm going to use Syphon now since I'm on a Mac, but basically these two protocols allows you to get information or the video stream from other applications and use it as a source in VPT. And it's also possible to stream the video output from VPT into Syphon or Spout with applications that support this standard. So I'm going to try to launch just kind of the test example from Syphon and see if I'm able to get it into VPT. So I launched it's just called the simple server. And it looks like this. It's just a graphic playing back. Then I will see if VPT is able to detect this source. So I go to the Syphon source and I need to click on this button here to refresh to see if we can see anything here. We might have to look around a little bit, because sometimes the names, at least in the simple server example, actually doesn't appear in the menu, but it was hidden in the second part here, just to see that it appears here. So now I could replace the VPT logo with the Syphon source, as you can see here. So this works really well. If you want to send Syphon out from VPT, you need to enable Syphon out. Same thing if you're on Windows, the spout out. And then I'll open the simple client application, which should allow me to then get VPT into this application, and you can see that that works also really well.